Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodons mods. This is Otaku's Showboat and today we are going to be discussing power generation, specifically through combustion turbines in the Pi Suite. For those of you who have been watching and enjoying the tutorial series thus far, please be sure to do all of the social and engagement stuff below the video. You can, of course, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/otakushowboat. You can support Pyanodons mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon and myself at patreon.com/Otaku Showboat if you are so inclined and able. So, there's several things to note about the whole combustion turbine situation because it's not particularly clear cut. This is an updated video because I have done a video like this in the past, but today we're going to talk a little bit more specific energy values. In the previous video, it was more, this is the mechanic, this is how it generally works, this is a example of a build to do with it, but we're going to discuss a couple of little intricacies that I have learned since then. So, the basics of this is that you have powerhouses, you have several powerhouses, you have combustion turbines. The powerhouses will make a combustion mixture. You will send the combustion mixture to your combustion turbines, and they are basically your steam engines that actually produce your power. You hook them up to your electric grid, and you are good to go. You will have power. Now, when you first look at these, with all the text unlocked here, you may be a little bit overwhelmed and think, well, what do I even with all of this? What does this mean? What does 800C combustion mixture mean? What does 500-degree combustion mixture mean? Like, what does it mean? Why are there two copies of all the recipe icons? What's going on here? Well, for each different type of fluid or solid that you can create combustion mixture out of, there are a coke variant, there is a coke variant, and there is a biomass variant. This will likely change in general efficiency over the course of time as the production of biomass is subject to change in the more midterm future from the time I'm recording this video. But at the moment, objectively, biomass is better on these recipes between coke versus biomass, because biomass is really, really simple to obtain right now. There are many ways to obtain biomass, and the other thing to consider with these powerhouses is that they also have a fuel slot. They need solid fuel in order to operate, which means that no matter what you choose, either the coke or the biomass recipe, the machine's going to be using that coke or biomass basically no matter what you do. It's going to use that for a solid fuel. Even if you try to provide some other more efficient solid fuel into these machines, good luck, because you have a solid fuel ingredient already. Good luck trying to keep the consistent single fuel across infinite time. Now, a few other notes to make about this. You'll note that it takes water in and makes steam out for these. There is a building. A couple of buildings, actually, if we go into entities. Ollie has arrived. Hello. Hello, Ollie. Yes, I know you're squirmy. You want to explore. You want to explore the desk. So there's these water cooling towers, a Mark 1 and a Mark 2. These things are designed in such a way that you take the steam output from these output 60 degree Celsius steam, 60 degrees C steam. That steam will get cooled in these cooling towers, and as long as you have enough cooling towers, it will 1-to-1 convert the steam back into water. So all you have to do is fill the system once, and you don't have to provide any water ever again into this system. That's not your only option, though, because if you have any available water on demand mod, where you just feel like having the water provided on demand, you can vent the steam through a tailings pond instead. Just constantly provide water and just put down a tailings pond, pipe up the tailings pond to the steam, and that's it. That's all you need to do. As Ollie looks like he may be. Are you going to join us? Are you going to join on the back of the chair? Yes, you are. There he is. There's the Ollie, the 6-month-old kitten at this point in time. Hello, my big overweight boy. Hello, my big boy. My big boy. He's a big boy. Big ferocious boy. So, that's the first thing to note, is that there's this little intricacy with the water and steam that you do have the option to do a closed loop of water by using cooling towers in here. However, the way that I have been preferring to do this is to provide a consistent source of water through a separate mod, the stone water wells mod. You could just as well do something that just like water fill that makes a unit of water on demand, or explosive excavation. That's the one. To make a tile of water and put a regular pump down, whatever you so desire, to get water on demand. There's even pump jack recipes in the Pie Suite itself that gives you water on demand by placing pump jack buildings down. So you do have that option, and you can destroy the steam through the power of the tailings pond. Though that is a script, do keep that in mind. That is a script, and it would probably be best to just let a recipe run rather than have a script run on the tailings pond. But I have never had a noticeable decrease in performance due to too many tailings ponds. That's like not a thing. There are many other things that will be problematic, and just number of entities is the main weakness for the Pie Suite in terms of performance. Being able to get to the end of the game at maximum performance is basically impossible. Heck, getting into chemical science at full frames is basically impossible. So we have to think about, okay, we're gonna have a big entity count, huge entity count. A tailings pond's not gonna do much, even though it is a script in the end. So the mechanics of the actual recipes here. There are a lot of recipes. They produce different values of combustion mixture temperature. And on the combustion turbine itself, it gives you a certain value for the amount of power that's output. And you have this thing saying max temperature 1000 C on this combustion turbine. What does that effectively mean? So, this means, just looking at this tooltip, if you throw 1000 degrees C combustion mixture into this turbine, 60 units per second of it as the dolly comes in. Hello, my dolly. You gonna look at the camera, my dolly? Yeah, you wanna come sit on my lap or something, or do you wanna go explore? Or do you want to explore? If you throw 60 units per second per combustion turbine, mind you, at 1000 C, you will get 24.8 megawatts. That's what this is saying. You will get 24.8 megawatts if and only if you are able to provide 60 units per second of 1000 degrees C combustion mixture. There is only one, two, but one recipe that gives you 1000 C. Well, there is actually just one because this doesn't have a biomass coke variant because this uses coal briquettes instead. This is the only one. This is it. This is your only way of getting 1000 C combustion mixture. Coal briquette, petroleum gas, refined syngas, and water. A lot of the complicated factors going into this is how you make these things, because that also uses power. You need power to make petroleum gas, coal briquettes, refined syngas, and water, and now Ollie is jealous of Dolly sitting in the lap. He has jumped down and he's now walking across the desk. You do not get access to this very early on, and in fact, it's not really going to be that great to do very early on. But what does it mean if you throw something, a combustion mixture, at this that is less than 1000 C? That does mean that you end up with less than the full 24.8 as available power. You will not get that full 24.8, most likely. This is accurately reflected on the available power bar as soon as you put in the fluid at a specific temperature. So once you've hooked it up, it will tell you the actual temperature. Hello? Where'd he go? I heard him scratching behind me. So, what is the actual power that you're going to get out of this? How do you calculate the amount of power that you get out of this? Well, the first thing to note is that all fluids in Factorio have a base temperature of 15 degrees C. That is effectively your zero value here. So whatever number is displayed on the output temperature, in this case 520 degrees centigrade or Celsius, you have to subtract 15 from that first. That is the first point of note. Subtract 15 from 520. And either way, this is going to just be a general estimate. A relatively accurate estimate, but an estimate nonetheless. So subtract 15. So in this case, with benzene, we get 505 degree combustion mixture. That goes into the calculation for the amount of power here. And from there, it's basically just a ratio. It's 505 over 1000 times 100, so 505 degrees C divided by 1000. That gives you a divided by 1000. That gives you a 0.505 value. If you multiply by 100, that's percentage. But yeah, it's about 50.5%, as you would expect. You then have to multiply that by the max available power, so 24.8. So if you multiply 0.505 by 24.8, you get 12.524 of megawatts of available power. If you are providing 60 units per second of that 520C combustion mixture at it. There is rounding involved on the display on these tooltips, so you won't really... It won't be exactly 12.524. You might see like a 12.6 here, or 12.5, or some other roundabout tenths place value changes, depending on the calculation and the temperature that you're actually throwing at it. So keep all of that in mind. So in the case of benzene at 520C, you should expect about 12.5 megawatts of power per 60 units. Now, the way that I've placed this, I actually very specifically placed 6 powerhouses here. 6 powerhouses produce 300 units per second of combustion mixture. That very easily coincides with 5 combustion turbines. That is your initial ratio Hello, Ollie. Do you want to go back up? You want to go back up, Ollie? You gonna go back? Yes, he is. There, the Ollie has returned. So we have this nice little ratio, 6:5. There is more than just the Mark I combustion turbine. There is a Mark II and a Mark III of the combustion turbine. So upgrading to Mark II, once you have the Circuit 2s to do so, it's a much bigger building, for one, so you do have to plan around the fact that these are much bigger buildings. They get bigger still at Mark III. But at Mark II, it's still consuming 60 units of fluid per second, up to, but it has a much higher available power. We can ignore the efficiency value on these. I don't really understand why they actually display that value. It's not necessary. The math is done for you in the available power bar. That max power is the power after efficiency. So it's like, oh, okay, fine. You don't need to do it. It's already done for you. The max available power is 56.1 megawatts. So the math here is also fairly straightforward. It would be, in the case of this benzene combustion mixture, 0.505 times the 56.1, giving us 28.3305 megawatts of power at 60 units per second. Of course, we would have to multiply this by 5 to get 141.6525 as compared to 62.62 from the combustion turbine Mark 1s. So we go from 62.62 up to 141.6525, more than doubling the amount of available power for nothing, basically. Just a change in the actual turbine itself, upgrading the turbine itself without any other changes to inputs will double your power generation. This is why in a standard Pi game I tend to avoid Mark I combustion turbines like the plague. Mark I combustion turbines are not that great overall, considering that the available recipes that you have access to that are within reason to use produce low temperature combustion mixture in the 500-degree range. In that lower 500-degree range, the most popular being the syngas and hydrogen recipes. Where's syngas? No. This is a really big list. Where are you, syngas? Syngas the Cineast. There it is. There it is. This produces 550 minus 15. You get marginally more power out of that, but yeah, it's still not that great, especially compared to things like the oil burners. So the oil burner, I don't know if I can do this from within here. The oil burner, where are you? In petroleum handling. This thing. The oil burner is a boiler, vanilla boiler, that takes in fluid with a fuel value. The way that this mechanic basically works is that a fuel with a fuel value, which we can see in here, will get consumed at a rate of 1.8 megawatts, or megajoules per second, per burner, right? So this ends up being quite efficient if you can throw 1 megajoule stuff at it in particular, like benzene. So in this case, a benzene build that can do, 62.62 megawatts of power. Yeah, that would be in the realm of possibility, and with standard steam engines, mind you, of like what one would consider a quote unquote vanilla type of a build. Something that's like this. Whoops. that's the that's just but anyway, yeah, it's just something that looks a lot like this right over here, right? This setup, of course, with a pipe in the middle and with water provided, right? Now, you do the math here, and if you have 40 of these total, two thingies of water feeding it, that's 1.8 times 40, which is 72 megawatts of power. And then how much fluid is that? Well, the fluid's 1 megajoule. So it's 72 units of fluid. In this case, if we are looking at benzene, we can spend 72 units of benzene and get 72 megawatts of power out of it through 40 oil burners and 80 steam engines versus spending 200 units of benzene, right? 200 units of benzene plus 6 biomass to get 62.62. 62.62. Yeah, so that's obviously not as good in terms of just output of power per unit of fluid, right? However, this is huge, right? This is huge by comparison to this. Even with all the like pipe logistics, all that tailings pond, etc., etc., this is much smaller than this in terms of the actual power infrastructure. You also have to consider the infrastructure to actually make the 200 units of benzene. Why am I using benzene here as an example? Because you can make benzene out of coal water slurry fuel, which is tailings, and it's really, really easy to get into benzene in particular. However, there's also a direct coal water slurry fuel that is actually much more efficient because then you don't have to spend the power converting it into benzene and aromatics. And aromatics. And I think that the math does work out that this ends up being better overall. So if we look at 200 units per second of coal water slurry fuel, as I tend to refer to it, this is a 550C combustion mixture on it, and it's a bit easier to get into than the actual benzene itself. I think it halves on the benzene thanks to the additional aromatics. So this would be 550 minus 15. 535 divided by 1000 times 24.8 or 13.268 times 566. 66 megawatts in Mark 1 turbines. Mark 1 turbines. So if you haven't caught on by now, Mark 1 turbines are not good. They're not good in terms of fuel efficiency, essentially. Fuel efficiency, not so much. Not so much. It's almost always going to be better to have one of these or several of these set up if you have the space to do so. It's almost always going to be better to do something along these lines with all the other logistical stuff associated with this. However, once you get into Mark II combustion turbines, well, then it's hands down going to always be better to do the Mark II combustion turbines over this in here. It's basically just do it with the Mark II combustion turbines and for space efficiency, if nothing else. These things have over twice the output of the Mark I's. Mark IIIs are a little bit different. Mark IIIs no longer consume 60 units per second of fluid. They now consume 90 per second of fluid, and therefore the amount of available power is reflective of the 90 per second. It's 130 for every 90 units. So we have to take that into account as well, because we're no longer multiplying by 5, we're multiplying by 3 point something here if we're throwing 300 units at this, because 90 doesn't go into 300 particularly easily. It doesn't it doesn't go into it particularly easily. That's 3.3 repeating. 3 and a third on that. So you might want to think about, at Mark III, changing the ratio, because 90 definitely goes into 900 per second very easily. Yeah, so you could see the problem here. We're stuck on the powerhouses with the 50 units per second. But let's keep this in mind as well. Powerhouses also have mark levels. And by the time you get your Mark III combustion turbines, well, you're dang well certain about to have these as well at Mark III. So if we look at the Mark III, well, it's 150 per second per Mark III powerhouse. They are 3 times as good. So it's 6 of these. It's 6 of these to feed into, 5, 10 of these. We have 900 per second. That's 6 into 10, right? And that also happens to be a multiple of 300. It's 3 times as much. So if we do this comparison between Mark II and Mark III, let's take our example here that was the 141.6525. If we divide that back by 5 to our 28 and then multiply instead by 15, that would be 425-ish megawatts of power if we had basically 3 of these setups here off of the benzene power. And we'll compare that to the 10 here. So that does produce, it's the same value of stuff. So it would be, in this case, the same scalar, which would be 0.505 times the value of 130 in this case. So 65.65 times 10, or 656.5 megawatts, compared to 424.9575. Now, if we subtract 424.9575, divide that by the initial value, 424.9575 times 100, that's about a 54.48-ish percentage increase between Mark II and Mark III. So it's not as dramatic of increase in terms of the amount of extra power that you gain at Mark III. It's about 54 and a half. Let's just say 54 and a half, 55% difference between the Mark II and the Mark III combustion tower. Turbine, whatever you want to call it. These are turbines, technically. However, there is a pretty noticeable difference here. We have 5 fewer entities of the Mark III combustion turbines, so do keep that in mind as well. the difference in entity counts, 15 versus 5, in a big base at that scale, later phases of the game, this could matter to you for performance reasons. Speaking of later game things to consider, modules. Modules are absolutely a thing to consider going into the late game. If we grab a few of these, cannot do productivity on powerhouses. That's on the powerhouse recipes. That's the first thing to note. What you can do, however, is throw effectivity or efficiency modules at it. Now, 80% is the limit, so really 2 of these is fine. And you can throw speed if you're willing to take the offset. And you can beacon the crap out of these and speed them up and do all that good stuff. But reducing the amount of consumption here, the only thing this does effectively is reduce the amount of the solid fuel that you're using here. Just it reduces the amount of biomass that's used to feed the building itself. That's it. That's it. That's all. It's using very little to begin with. Our consumption goes down to 80 kilowatts. Offset as you can with the beacons. Do whatever you can to keep that at negative 80% or within reason. Speed helps a lot. Speed helps a lot, but it isn't the end all be all, as it were. It's not the absolute end all be all. I'm looking for where's bacon? 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 There. See, I keep looking for the old bacon icon, and it's new. Beacons were upgraded relatively recently. So if you throw in these things into the beacons and then sort of offset with speed-ish, we can end up with some interesting stuff. You need to power them for them to have some effect, but yeah, you can play that game with beacons and try to get as fast of speed as possible. I have Ollie's butt on me. Hi. Ugh. Ollie and Dolly's also in my lap too, so if I've got both of my kitties with me today. So, we've talked about this for about half an hour now, these intricacies. What's the best overall set of recipes that I would recommend people to use? That I think is something that people are looking for out of this after all of that discussion. So let's go through this list and talk a bit about the viability of our options in here. So benzene was the first one I mentioned. It's easily made out of combustion, out of tailings, but you could also combust the coal water slurry fuel instead of benzene and get a bit of a better ratio out of that. By the way, Hellmod now has temperature of fluids, and it actually takes the temperature into account now. So, yeah, you can actually start playing with combustion mixture at this point. That is very, very, very appreciated. So, yeah, the thing with the cold water slurry fuel, if I go up and I say I want to have 300 of that, that's 200 cold water slurry fuel versus... I said 300 of you. Oh, it's still a little bit buggy, it seems. Just a little bit on the buggy side. So that's 200 benzene, and 200 benzene would require 400 cold water slurry fuel. So 400 cold water slurry versus 200 to make a higher temperature thing. It would also give you 200 aromatics. The aromatics can also be burned into additional 520C. So keep that in mind as well. This isn't going to, unless I do Matrix Solver, and then it will, like, not like me very much. Oh, it looks like it handled it fine. It handled it fine. So in this case, 200 cold water slurry gives you 300 units of 520C from 200 versus 200 units into 550C directly. And that's why you shouldn't really do the benzene overall. But as I mentioned, benzene also has a fuel value of 1 megajoule, making it really easy to get into since cold water slurry is tailings. It's tailings. You still have to subtract the power that you need to get into the tailings, but you're gonna have how many tailings? Millions, millions, billions of tailings over the course of an entire Pi game, so don't worry about it. Coal gas is not recommended because it is almost always better to go directly into syngas rather than do the 500C coal gas. Uh, ethanol, I laugh because ethanol's way too much stuff to make. You spend way too much power to get into this, and it has its own use outside of this. And yeah, you don't just. It's out of mind. It's a joke. Fish oil, not so much a joke per se, but good luck. This would be probably reserved for later phases of the game where you can start getting inundated with fish. When you have the ability to get inundated with fish. In the alternative, Pi really likes giving you options to deal with excess stuff. I don't get it. I don't design that way, but it's a thing for you to do to get rid of excess, quote unquote excess fish, through the form of fish oil, uh, combustion mixture. It's a pretty good temperature, 650C. That's quite nice. So it could be viable if you have the fish to feed it. Lard, another one I have to laugh about until later phases of the game, where you can get yourself inundated with lard relatively easily, lower power stuff. Higher mark level buildings with higher mark level modules, with uh, better processes, growth hormones, resveratrol, pheromones recipes. Those raising of pups slash cubs slash calves into uh, multiple adults, processes that you do get access to, the really good recipe processes. That's gonna give you the necessary lard where this could actually be somewhat feasible, but not until very late phases of the game. Methane, I'd say just flat no, just because of the Moondrop being not as good with Pi Alien Life anymore. It's big. That's the problem here, is that it's really big. And another one of those things is like you're not going to consider this until the late game, but by the time you get to the late game, you're going to have access to higher temperature combustion mixtures, and you likely have a solution already that you've just decided to go with as your primary method, regardless of what other better methods you have access to in those later phases of the game. Oleochemicals are a meme. Don't do it. Same with tall oil. It just no. Syngas is perhaps one of the, if not the most popular, of the combustion tower, combustion turbine recipes. Uh, just because it's really easy to make out of tar. It's tar into coal gas into syngas. It's a really good recipe. Add oxygen for an even better ratio. And if you're adding oxygen to make the syngas from coal gas plus oxygen recipe, you're also going to end up with hydrogen that you will use. That's why they are listed in here. In here. So if instead what I wanted was the hydrogen syngas and I wanted 300 total combustion mixture, it's not gonna tell me because I have to go and be like, hey, give me that out of splitting water. That gives me hydrogen, and it should do the thing. Not gonna do the thing for me. You're not gonna do the thing for me. Great. Well, either way, just hell mod notwithstanding, you'll end up with not just the 300 units for the 550C, you'll also end up with 240 units of the 520C. Maybe I could just split this off in a separate block and it would tell me how much I get, but yeah, that's the stuff if you want to use the hydrogen out of this. That's going to give you not quite 300, but a fair amount to fill, I think, 4 turbines, three or 4, not quite the full 5. Makes it quite useful doing syngas plus hydrogen to maximize the power output and offset the power to make the buildings use to begin with. Diborane is another joke. Don't even think about it. You're spending borax and all of the infrastructure to get the borax and wash the borax, and electrolyzing the diborane, which electrolyzers use a lot of power in and of themselves to get that. And yeah, just no. Heavy oil, potentially valuable after it's been rebalanced. It's a 1-to-1 steam cracked from crude oil, so you do have to spend steam on that to crack into the heavy oil. There's potential here, but it's really low on temperature. I would much rather throw the heavy oil into my oil burners than use it here, and by the time I get Mark II combustion turbines, there are many other options for us. It's a similar situation with light oil, except light oil is it's more difficult to get into at scale, though realistically speaking, you could do light oil, tall oil. They tend to be tied together when you are trying to produce them, so there's an option there. An option is all I'll really say there. Petroleum gas. Okay, so there's a petroleum gas recipe out of aromatics and hydrogen, but it's probably better to just burn the aromatics and hydrogen rather than combine them like this to make the petroleum gas. But there's various different loops of things you can get petroleum gas relatively simply. It's just not quite as efficient as some of the other stuff like syngas hydrogen. Overall, and the buildings required for this are pretty large as well. Methanol is also a meme. Don't do it. Same with refined syngas. Don't do it. Acetylene also a bit too much of infrastructure to do, and it consumes a lot of coke in that process. Though it does have a really high fuel value in and of itself, so potentially an option for oil burners instead. Olefins also pretty memey. They do produce a really high 750C, and you need hydrogen for them. If they don't take water, they take hydrogen for some reason, and yeah, that would be decent if you have a way of getting into olefins basically for free. The problem is a lot of the time you're spending catalysts, and if you're making power, you probably want to try avoiding the use of catalyst like metals and such to get into the thing, so there's that to keep in mind. Diesel plus fuel rods, pretty decent, depending on how you get your fuel rods. Pretty decent. My biggest concern here is that fuel rod Mark 1 because yeah, it all comes down to how you're getting that fuel rod and how energy efficient you're going to be getting that fuel rod on that diesel recipe. Similarly with the gasoline, same problem with the gasoline, and you're spending extra stuff here. You're spending the biomass plus the fuel rod plus the gasoline to get only 50 C more temperature out of that. Eh. Aromatics, again, it all depends on how you're getting your aromatics. If you're getting it out of tar from creosote, that's not so great. If you're getting it out of benzene, it's probably better just to do the coal water slurry fuel than the aromatics. Crude oil, really low temperature, and more biomass. A lot of this is 3. Well, these are 4 units of biomass coke. So I would not do this with crude. You can convert crude into other more reasonable, better things to use, like fuel oil. Note that it's a 2-to-1 on crude into fuel oil. That's the only major concern here. It's 2-to-1, and fuel oil, honestly, better to throw at a thing. But realistically speaking, due to that really poor ratio of 2-to-1 to get into fuel oil, it's better to just steam crack into heavy oil at that point. Because the heavy oil steam cracking is a lot closer to 1-to-1. I won't say it's exactly 1-to-1 because it does need the steam, and you can oil burner some crude oil / heavy oil to keep feeding your crude oil heavy oil. The steam requirement for it. So, as I said, not quite 1-to-1, but still a lot better than 2-to-1 for fuel oil. So you'll want to probably go the heavy oil route for that. Even that's still better, even taking into account the difference in temperature here, the 500 C versus the 800 C, and I would still do oil burners instead. The other mark level fuel rods are also pretty memey. Like, you're just no. These all require pretty advanced uranium processing to get into, especially that Mark V. That's going to require all the way up utility science level of processing of uranium, and you are not going to be wanting to spend your yellow cake on fuel rod Mark Vs. And if you are spending it on fuel rod Mark Vs, you're not doing it to get 950 C combustion mixture. You're doing it to get into a better recipe for molten super steel. That's what you'll be using it for. Similarly, with the Mark II fuel rod, you'll be using that to get into stainless steel. Not stainless. Stainless? Yes, stainless. Stainless. That changed, right? It's Mark II. I think something changed. It's either the basic super steel or the stainless steel. I am not as caring these days. Something changed somewhere. A fuel rod changed on a requirement into getting stainless / super steel. And yeah, I think it's the base super steel that changed. The base super steel changed to Mark II, and then the upgraded version is Mark V, and then upgraded versions of stainless steel now require fuel rods. That's the one. It's a little difficult keeping track of literally the entire pie suite in one brain. Okay? Just so we're clear, just having one brain to keep track of the entirety of everything in the pie suite and all of the updates and changes over time, it's a lot harder than it seems. It's a lot harder than it seems. So if I make it look easy, just know that it is not in the slightest easy to keep track of all of these processes and things, let alone also having to keep track of different mod suites entirely on top of all of this at the same time. So, we talked about the hydrogen. The kerosene depends on how you get the kerosene, but it could be pretty viable. It really all depends on how you get that kerosene. There is a direct recipe, heavy oil into kerosene, but that is a really poor ratio of heavy oil into kerosene. Otherwise, you are spending titanium tetrachloride to get into the kerosene, which, as I said, I would try to avoid the spending of those catalyst items if you're trying to make power. Outside of that, which building was I looking at? This one. Outside of that, our next one is lubricant. No, like just flat no. It is 1-to-1 of heavy oil, and it does produce higher temperatures, so if you've gone the effort to do heavy oil, you may as well convert it 1-to-1, but then you have to take into account the power used on the line of chemical plants that's converting your heavy oil to lubricant, which is a pretty inefficient recipe as well. It only converts small amounts per unit recipe. It's like 10 units into 10 units. So yeah, it's not that great. It's a lot of buildings, and that's a lot of power. Naphtha is a joke. Probably not gonna even think about naphtha besides as a byproduct for the most part throughout your entirety of your Pie Sweet journey. Natural gas, though, that's a pretty good one. This is one that I used in my Paidu Valley series. I used this a lot as my primary. I used this as my primary power going into the late game. This is a really, really, really useful way of using natural gas because natural gas comes directly out of crude oil nodes. It is good. It is good to do this, even despite it using 4 biomass versus 3 of other recipes. It is still really good. This is my primary power. Just for its ease of obtaining natural gas out of pump jacks, as well as just yeah. I mean, it's the ease. It's easy to do this. Uh, it's not as easy anymore because you can no longer do biomass out of crude oil, but you can do it out of tar instead, and it'll still be very useful. So if you have a tar patch and a crude oil patch relatively close to each other, this becomes incredibly valuable. And it's 600C, so that's what, 585.585 times the available power on the turbine for your total output. The natural gas, by the way, has a fuel value of 90 kilojoules. So it used to be like a megawatt or a megajoule, somewhere along those lines. It used to be much higher for natural gas, but at 90 kilojoules. Oh god, so let's do this math. This was actually a question on my Discord as of this morning, actually, of recording this video. So 90 kilojoules. It needs to be divided by 1,000. That's 0.09 megajoules. 0.09 megajoules. We've got 1.8 per oil burner divided by 0.09. So that's 20 units of fluid per thingy. And if we look at a pipe, if we define a pipe as 1,200 units per second, that would mean that a full pipe of natural gas would feed 60 burners. Is that accurate? I may have messed up the math there, but yeah, about 60. I think that's accurate. Ish. Sounds about right. So yeah, if you have the full pipe, then sure you can get some power out of it. I mean, even 90 kilojoules will add up when you have a lot of units of the stuff over time. So that's a thing. That's a thing. And then shale oil again. Who does shale oil production? I don't. You need to process oil sands to get your shale oil. And well, a few people do it. A few people do happen to process oil sands. It is completely optional, and you don't have to do it. And I wouldn't do it, especially with 600C. Then you would get into the briquette. The first briquette recipe 900C. This is outclassed by its 1000C counterpart. Xylanol is going to get used in high grade processing. you're going to use this exclusively for high grade processing. You'll see how expensive it actually is when you actually do the high grade processing. So this is probably going to be a hard pass no for most people. And then the 1000C. If you want the 1000C, go for it. Otherwise, I give it a pass because it's a lot more complex of a system than simply having uh, things like natural gas. There are simpler setups than this when it's petroleum and refined syngas and the coal briquettes to get into that 1000C. If you're doing hot air processing and you want to reheat your hot air, then yes, you have to do this because that process at hot stone bricks requires you to reheat the the whatever outlet gas for, and that requires 1000C combustion mixture, unfortunately. So do keep that in mind. As I said in that particular video, I would prefer just making more of the uh, outlet gas for than doing this, and I would spend this on actually making power instead. But with that all said, this really long, hour long ish video, 56 ish minutes, that's the intricacies of doing combustion turbine power in the Pi Suite, and a lot of the stuff that you have to think about when doing the combustion turbine power. Oh, God. So that, yeah, I hope you have taken notes over the course of this, because there will be an exam. There will not be an exam. You have a practical exam in your actual playthrough of the Pi Suite that this will ideally help prepare you for. With that, I would like to thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku Showboat. If you have enjoyed this video and the series thus far, please be sure to do all of the social and engagement stuff below the video. You can, of course, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/otakushowboat. You can support Pyanodon's mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon, and myself at patreon.com/otakushowboat if you are willing and able. I, of course, will see you all on the next one.